ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the asset class. He's Jesse.
And my boy Earl.
We're going to be going through a lot of information here, so we want to do a quick disclaimer. We want you to do your own research. We want you to go after licensed professionals with a track record of success. As you're doing your own research, each one, reach one, teach one, because that's how we learn and grow as a community.
Absolutely. And when I think about growing as a community, I literally had a meeting with the African Chamber of Commerce here in Colorado, and they're based out of Denver. They have a business accelerator cohort that's going to be starting in April. And it's a 12-week course that gives entrepreneurs the framework that they need to build a business. It's one night a week for the 12 weeks. And, each evening is 2 hours of a subject matter expert giving invaluable insight to entrepreneurs that have the aspiration to learn and grow and transition their entrepreneurial ambitions into enterprise value via a small business. It's interesting how relationships truly are the foundation of business growth. Like that old adage of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Relationships truly matter. So coming back from InvestFest last year, I had my first business scaling presentation that I gave to a room of entrepreneurs, which in turn manifested into another presentation. And through that presentation, I met I had known them, but got to know them even more, the board of the African Chamber of Commerce. So they hit me up about facilitating some classes for their accelerator cohort. And that was literally a conversation today, kind of putting those logistics in place, or planning the initial planning for, those logistics. So going back to the end of the disclaimer, community, we all have intrinsic value and the ability to share said intrinsic value with the collective, for the collective to become stronger. And in the times that we live in now, we talk about it quite frequently on this here program, the criticality of, when you know what your value, the value that you can provide, the service that you can provide, that strengthens the ecosystem, that helps people that we collectively care about be better versions of themselves, there's an inherent responsibility to answer the call, or to create the spaces in which the call would even manifest, so that we're all able to do our parts in this community. Because that cohort that I'll be facilitating some of the course load through is a contribution to the overall ecosystem, because those entrepreneurs will leave those classes that I facilitate, with greater context as to what it takes to actually operate in the arena. And all of our listeners, all of our classmates have intrinsic value, and it takes the intentional inventory of said intrinsic value to then say, you know what, this is something that is a gift that I have, and how can I take this gift and strengthen the overall ecosystem by contributing said gift.
That's powerful. And instead of quoting Jay-Z, I'm going to quote my man Jada Kiss this time. You know, you live for your kids, but you die for yourself. So we're talking about legacy, as my man 19 Keys would say, you understand me. We're building communities and we're nation building. And that all starts with understanding what your value is, how to deliver said value, and how to increase said value. So I'm really, really excited to see what you guys have coming out of the Accelerator, all the different guys and gals that are going to get their business moving at a different velocity. We need that yesterday.
100%, 100%. And that's what I was telling them. With the stats being what the stats are, 96% of Black-owned businesses not having any employees, the hustle mentality has served its purpose. And it's time to, like, go ahead and put that baby to bed. Like, you know, we got what we needed to get from the hustle mentality. Now it's time to build enterprise value. And that takes a different discipline than that of hustle. You know, hustling is surviving, right? It's time to evolve past merely surviving to truly building institutional wealth and the power that comes along with it. Now, as we talk about what it takes to actually establish that, time waits for no man. And it felt like 2025 flew by in the blink of an eye. That's what it felt like to me. We are currently in week 8 of 52 already. Week 8 of 52 already. For me personally, it feels as though we were just talking about transitioning into 2026, and we are now 8 weeks in. When we start talking about the inventory, the intentionality of where we are now relative to where we aspire to be by the end of the year has 15% of your goals for the year been accomplished. Because 15% of the year, ladies and gentlemen, is officially a thing of the past. So if we have not achieved 15% of our total goal for the year, then how much of that do we need to be making up for in the remaining 85% of the year? That is a critical self-accountability measurement that we all must hold ourselves to as entrepreneurs that aspire to lead enterprises that generate financial security in the short term and generational wealth over the long term. That intentionality. How close are we to hitting our annual goal? And if we are far off, if we're not 15% in to that goal, then what do we need to do at this point to get on track? Because I assure you, we will be talking about 30% of the year being past us quicker than any of us will give credence to. And we will be talking about 50% of this year being over with just as fast. So as we sit here at 15, what have we done so far? What do we have left? What are we doing to make this shit shake as entrepreneurs? Or when you think about 15% of the year already being in the books, what's your read on the fact that we are already 8 weeks in?
I feel like I'm 6 months in just because the amount of work I'm doing and some of the sleep that I'm missing out on. And I know people can sometimes tune out when we start talking about the numbers, but I want to bring it back to reality why it's so important. You're talking about 15% of the year, and we're talking about building real intrinsic enterprise value. If we're going to do that, if we're going to have our shares of our company publicly offered and is publicly traded, we need to offer a set amount of value as we're going forward. It just can't be figuring it out before the quarter, half the year, 3/4 of the year earning reports come out. It's something that we have to track at a meticulous rate because we only get to keep what we track. So by tying in these numbers and tying in our goals, it gives us so much more control. And it also gives us so much more freedom. If we're not tracking the numbers, but we're just working really, really hard and we're using all our ingenuity and we're being the hustler, it puts us in a state of scarcity where it's so hard to steer the ship, where it's so hard to course correct because you might not even know which way to go. Do you follow the North Star? Do you follow Ursa Major? What are we following? So I think it's a very freeing and powerful place. I know for my own goals, man, we go past 15%. It's getting crazy over here. And I'm just in a position where I want us, the team, everyone that's working in tax erasers, working in the wealth company, working in all these different fronts that I'm touching, that we keep this going and maybe even speed it up a little bit because there'll be some lulls, there'll be some drawbacks and whatnot. So let's go ahead and get that extra credit right now while we can.
1000%. And as those business endeavors manifest, we get to see the enterprise value of those assets increase as a result. Now, speaking to that point, as the asset that is our businesses continues to increase in value, it creates a different level of leverage when it comes to being able to acquire other assets. Now, last week, we got into or began the conversation about real estate and how its history informs the present, but with it being such a very broad and very deep topic, as we're talking about increasing the value of our assets, because that's exactly what growing a business is. And as that growth happens on the business side and, we are able to, again, leverage that value towards acquiring additional assets, namely on the side of real estate, where we left off last week lend to bridging the gap between actually building up the leverage, be able to invest in real estate assets?
My man, I see what you did there. How does that lend to? So lending and capital to be able to acquire real estate and land are pivotal when we're talking about nation building and community building. If we take away real estate, the wealth gap between white and black goes away. And it doesn't really matter, even if it's a leveraged situation where we're talking about a highly educated black or brown person in the United States of America versus a lesser educated, lesser earning person. If they have real estate, they're acquiring more wealth, and it creates a cycle of wealth. Because when we think about it, really good schools increase the value of properties. And then how are those schools paid and funded? Through the estate tax in the area, which means more funds go to the school. They get better teachers, they get better books, resources, all of that kind of stuff. And then it just keeps going and keeps going. And then you end up with a lot of these really affluent areas. You end up with very intelligent people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they all went and got PhDs, but they had their mind molded into a way where they could apply that to this world and create opportunity and income and security for their family. So last week, when we were in conversation, we were talking about land grants, we were talking about black farmers, and we were talking about how 6 million acres were taken back from Black people in a very, very short period of time. And since, as you put it, the conversation of real estate is so vast, we had to split it into 2 episodes. It's ridiculous. So now we're going to get more into the structural element, and we're going to talk more about the lending portion of it. And we can't do that without skipping the year 1919. It is a huge pitchfork in Black American history. So, the last time we talked about 1865 and land grants. Well, skip ahead now to 1919. We've had many, many, many powerful Black cities burned to the ground. We had Harlems everywhere. 1919 is the beginning. Well, I can't even say the beginning, but it was the most accelerated year of historical background. A lot of times people will misquote Martin Luther King Jr. and they'll say, oh, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But, his quote was always, if you're telling a man that does not own a pair of boots to pull himself up by his bootstraps, what type of person are you? You know what I mean? It's just cruel and demeaning was his words, his sentiments around it. So 1919 was a wild time. We saw about 3,000 lynchings. We saw multiple different massacres. They were called riots at the time, but they're massacres where we had, angry white people come and destroy Black towns and Black cities. And we're not just talking about Tulsa. Like, I love the heritage of Black Wall Street. I love what they rebuilt. But I'm telling you, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of cities around the United States that were very prosperous, doing their own thing, completely independent on their own, that were burned to the ground. So 1919, there were so many Black people that were killed. And I want to remind you, those 3,000 lynchings are not included in the body counts of these towns getting burned down, where it's 100 people plus getting burned down. And it was an interesting situation because we had Black soldiers coming back, decorated from war, and they were not fitting back into their place in society. They saw how the world worked in Europe and how they were treated in Germany. Does that mean there's no racism in Germany? No. It doesn't mean that they don't have the same classism and the caste system that we have here that ends up becoming Jim Crow. Yes. So, you have these guys fighting back. You have people just looking for a reason. And it's a really, really dark time in America. It's rough. And this is where we're seeing more and more mass migration of Black people in the South going to the North and trying to find a place to build a life. So with that, I mentioned the 3,000 lynchings, over 60 bombings. We're talking about churches being bombed. We're talking about family residences being bombed. We're talking about orphanages being bombed. It's a terrible time, And as we transition into 1930, it's a really important time because we're talking about like the Great Depression, where everybody is down bad. And the violence just increases. And this is where we start seeing white mobs, really taking souvenirs of Black people when they're lynching, burning them. People are taking away, cutting off a piece of skin and putting it on a lanyard, where people are making lamps out of Black bodies, where people are keeping bones and different parts as a trophy of victory because they felt they were protecting their communities and protecting their way of life. And, it's absolutely sickening and disgusting to think about them doing that. And it makes me emotional just even saying it. So I wanted to, tie in the timeless Billie Holiday because in 1930, this is when her song Strange Fruit comes out. And Strange Fruit, I'm just going to read you guys some of the lyrics because you do not want me to sing. That's going to cause a different pain for everybody else. But southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hang from poplar trees. Pastoral scenes of gallant South, the bulging eyes and twisted mouth. Scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's the fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. Wow, that's heavy. And I remember being a jit, not really understanding that song, but knowing that I felt something in my body every time I heard it. And getting old enough to break down the lyrics and understand they're talking about people being lynched and hung from trees. I just want to, pass it to you for a second and then we'll get back into this real estate stuff. I know you always speak to the resilience of Black Americans and whatnot. Where do you, when we have to revisit this stuff, do you first go to rage? Do you go to sorrow? Do you go to a place where you're like, I need to build bigger, faster right now because I have the opportunity? Or what do you experience in your mind and your sentiments when we revisit what Jim Crow South was?
My mind goes to, we need to have more and 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 more of these conversations, because when we don't know our history, we are damned to repeat it. And in times in which there is a movement to erase Black history in its completeness as it relates to the United States, these conversations are absolutely necessary. This is a part of it. Again, we need to be having far more of these conversations, not to willow around and, but to understand that rich history, to understand it contextualizes some of the challenges that are faced to this day. And it brings a different fuel and energy to the task at hand, to understand that some of the same challenges that generations of us have fought to overcome persist to this day. And it is cloaked in, these different comforting, distractive, things that are going on in society. But a lot of this stuff is remixed versions of the same shit. So it doesn't infuriate me. It doesn't enrage me. It gives me a sense of clarity and purpose, and the sense that, again, we got to have more of these conversations. And deeper than that, we got to find ways to make this history sexy. Like, we got to not to make it, not to take away the harsh realities of it, but I mean, making it sexy in a way find to consume the history, to retain the history, to learn from the history, so said history is never repeated. Because absent it, we are setting ourselves up for the same atrocities that we do.
1,000,000%. And that's why here at the asset class, we are diagnosing these different things, and then we are immediately tying into how to use these exact assets to build wealth. For the Black person today, or any person today, using the NACA program, that is a huge move to be able to get real estate here in the United States, to be able to get it with no money down, to get very, very favorable interest rates where your credit does not work against you. If you're like many, many Americans and their credit is working against them, I have a friend right now who just south of our town, he has over 25 acres he was able to get for $250,000 using the NACA program. With that land, tilled it up, started growing beets, and he cracks me up because he's like, yeah, there's people around me. They're trying to grow weed because marijuana more or less legalized here, y'all, if you didn't know. And he's like, my yield per ounce and how little water I need to do, I'm killing them. I'm making 6 times more than them. And it's a beautiful thing to see, when we get land, when we're able to fertilize that land, when we're able to sell our crops at a fair price, what it's doing. And it's like an extra $250,000 a year thing on top of his job. And he has a great job.
Who'd have thunk when you give folks access to the free market that they would be able to leverage it in the name of capitalism?
Well, you couldn't have set me up for a better segue, because when we're moving past these times and we're going into the 1950s, we're talking about Black men once again coming back from Europe because of World War II, and we have the GI Bill. And we have men that are promised, men and women, that are promised land, and we have all these things that are extending from the New Deal plan that happened in the 19 to help America get out of the hole that we had in the Great Depression. Well, guess who once again had a hard time getting homes?
You
Black people. And all of this was administered by the Federal Housing Administration. So when people, this is why it's important to have these conversations so we can talk about the difference between discrimination and racism. I know if someone just goes to the dictionary and looks at racism, you're like, oh, someone was mean to me about my race, that's racism. No, that's not what it is, because I could speak for Jesse and we could not care less if somebody of another race doesn't like us because we're Black. C'est la vie.
C'est la vie ain't quite reminiscent enough. For me, it's more like, fuck yeah. But as you are.
That's beautiful. He's my Obama angry interpreter right there. My anger interpreter. For me, I don't even get mad. I'm just like, oh, you're one of those. Cool. So that's not the issue with racism. Racism is systematic. As you've been learning following our series, the way that life insurance came, reparations came, land grants came, a bunch of wealth was given to these people, to these colonials that came from another nation. And those same assets, resources, and opportunities were not given to Black people. And for the most part, they weren't given to brown people or the Irish or the Italians for a very long time either, because they were treated in a similar manner. They didn't go through chattel slavery. Now, we did have servitude and whatnot with Irish people. If you ever want to learn more about that, there's a book called White Gold, and it goes so in depth on what it looked like for the Irish when they were going through their time. But here's the thing. Racism is built on systems. So that means whether I'm in the Dakotas or Delaware or Dallas, I'm going to find the same type of obstruction to my liberty in pursuit of happiness. That it is hard to get insurance, it's hard to get loans, it's hard to get work where I'm going to be paid at the same rate as my non-Black constituents. It's making sure that you create a caste system to keep a certain amount of people down. All this race stuff is all created because we're all humans, but it is a way to propagate super wealth when we're talking about unchecked capitalism. So I need you guys to understand that. So we're going into the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA. And this is where we normally in the Black community, everybody knows redlining, but they don't know the other lines. They don't know the full history. So there was blue was first, then green, then yellow, then red. So your blue areas were your most affluent, and this is your bigger business owners. It's seen as the safest areas to lend to, and it's going to be a forced appreciation because of the way the neighborhoods work and the way people live there. Next, you go to green. Those are people that are white collar, but they're not coming from these prestigious families. They're not the second nobility in America, but they're still making a really, really great living. Doctors, lawyers, judges could float in between either. Then when you get to your yellow, where this is your working class, maybe tiptoeing to upper middle, but the area is going down for one reason or another. And then your red area, this is Italians, this is Irish, this was Polish and German people for some point in time, but it's especially Black people. And it's seen as the most volatile areas. Do not lend, do not refi. And as we see later in life, they do lend for money, but they just lend at worse rates. When people get life insurance and car insurance in these areas, it's a higher rate. And we still have some of this stuff going on today because it's rationalized through different data. And saying it's on race, it's saying it's on zip code. Oh, but this zip code just happens to be all Black, happens to be all Puerto Rican, happens to be a high content of Mexican people. So we still have some of those things going on today. Even though when I was on the pandemic relief team, 2021, I did not have one Black person that I went to process to help them with PPP get approved.
Neither did I.
I'm talking about 850 credit score. I'm talking about the business credit score was on point. They had a nice amount of savings on personal and the business side. They had employees that were paying well. Business was healthy, not approved. So then we end up learning that most of the big four banks and the big four credit unions stacked the deck. So they took all the application and they looked at the amount that people were applying for. And the bigger the amount, the more they moved you up the stack because they're getting a commission from the federal government. So the amount of money has already been figured out what needs to be paid back into restitution. But once again, this is how we ended up with those that are being controlled by white people because they say it's unfair to pay it to Black people. So it's very simple talking about justice. All those applicants that were qualified to be able to get the money, you didn't give them the money, pay them. Pay them tax-free. Very, very simple. Everyone that tried to refi when nothing, and you could refi your house at 2.1%, and the big four rejected 50% of all qualified applicants that are Black, 30% of Mexican people that were qualified. Just pay these people directly. Give them the interest rate or pay them enough money where when we do the math in reverse, it's the same effect as them getting the interest rate plus some punitive charges. It's so simple to identify people that were hurt if that is your actual goal. And if your goal is justice and not control. So when we're talking about the FHA, they controlled all of this all the way down to policing. Because if you can group everybody in one area, then you can have different policing practices in different areas. So if the police go into a blue area, it's a phone call. It might be a letter. Hey, we just want to let you know we've heard some things and we appreciate you and we hope everything's great. They go to a green zone. You might have someone come by, give you a stern talking to. Yellow zone, look, it could be anything, however they're feeling that day. And in a red zone, you're already guilty and we're going to take you to prison and we're going to make you prove your innocence. So this is when we're talking about like stop and frisk that we had in New York, where they're stopping everyone because you could be a criminal. And that's the opposite of policing. That's another societal construction that we have for power. Police crimes. They don't stop crime. Proper line. Notice how that's not called the police line? Because when you're calling the police, they're coming after the fact and they're supposed to be peacekeepers. One of the best things that we can have in our communities are healthy resources, and that helps keep crime down. When people can go to the doctor, when people can eat, when people can get to good schools, when people can take time off of work to deal with ailments, stress, life, death, and everything else that we have in this human experience, we tend to see less crime. When local economies are strong, we see less crime. So I always have to throw that out here over and over and over again. And that's not to disrespect police officers. It's just put in perspective. It's not their job to fix communities and to stop crime and to do 100 million things. Their job is to police communities. That's what they're there for. So when the FHA was put in force and they have the police behind them, we start to see a radical systemization to be able to pass wealth away from Black people. We see people getting pushed into these cities to work in warehouses, and then subdivisions are being created. The suburban, where it's just away from the urban areas. And people are able to have these properties that have forced appreciation. They're able to get it for next to nothing. And I know every once in a while I'll have someone who is a real estate agent or a mortgage loan broker like, why didn't they just buy in the better areas? It was illegal. People went to prison. It was considered an act of sedition for a white person or white passing person to buy a property and sell it to a Black person in an area that they weren't supposed to be in. We saw people get multiple years in prison, husbands and wives, their kids sent to Social Security, to social offices to be in a foster home while their parents were in prison for selling these properties. It's like we can't skip over this stuff. And if we think about the whole real estate game, the first real estate brokers that we ever saw was probably like in 1790, more formalized in the 1870s. So it's like, when do you think the first Black realtor existed? In 1960, he's still selling real estate. I was on a Zoom with him. His name is Ben Layton. He's an amazing dude. We're going to put a picture of him up. He is the age of like our parents, the first Black realtor to ever be an NAR.
Wow.
It's insane.
That's nuts.
And the way that he got in was because he was adopted by a Jewish family, and you had to be sponsored into the situation, just like a country club, where you can't just join the country club. Somebody in the country club has to vouch for you, and you got to pay a certain amount of money. They made his parents pay the price of a house.
Bruh, the first Black governor in this country is 47 years old currently. The first.
First Black governor is 47. First Black realtor is still selling real estate.
Oh, man.
Ben Slayton. So, and then guess how old the first Black mortgage loan officer is? It's the same age as Ben. He's the same person. They wouldn't let other Black people in the club, so he had to start his own mortgage lending company.
Oh man! So when you've spoken with him, what would you say were some of the most offerings that he had from his experience in being the first at that level?
He went through. He has a mindset of not dwelling on the terrible things he went through, and there are plenty of things that he just won't speak on. He just won't. He says, I'm not a negative person. I'm not like that. Did I go through racism? Of course. Do I still go through it today? Of course. He's like, but that does not mean that I couldn't be excellent, and I couldn't execute, and I couldn't win and bring people with me. And that's the exact attitude that we have in this podcast that is going on in the world. A lot of them are very unfair, but it doesn't mean we can't win. That's what where I think about ingenuity. So FHA says, okay, you can't buy in these areas. Oh, you can't get a loan to get a house. Oh, you got to live in this apartment building. Guess what? All the apartment buildings are owned by one person. So they let it go into a slum, because once it gets to a certain point, the government will come back and give that person even more money, even though it gave them the money for the property the first time. Let them collect the rent. They give them a whole bunch of money and make it nice and gentrify it and then push the black people out. It's crazy. It's literally how Fred Trump made his money. It's crazy. And didn't pay back loans, didn't pay taxes. And, we had a situation for probably 5 to 10 years, 1950, 1960, in places like Philadelphia, where there's just land. And for whatever reason, black people would buy these little plots of land. The churches would get together and buy it, and they started building homes. And then, FHA would come around and say, oh, they're built the code, and destroy it. And they made a law that said if there is any lack of construction for 48 hours or more, the structure has to be demolished, which is insane. Could you imagine that now? I know people are probably watching like, shoot, I wish that was still a law. It takes forever to get stuff done. But it was made to hold back black people until they just got organized. And they set up shifts where it was always getting worked on, where everyone in the neighborhood was learning carpentry. They were learning masonry. They were learning the basics of being an architectural engineer. And it's why so many people, like our fathers, are so good at doing stuff, fixing stuff, because it was literally put in them. And some of these homes still stand in places like Philly. A lot of them have been knocked down because of urban renewal, because then the family is forced to have to take out a loan from the bank and get a house that they can't pay off. If you know anything about what Wells Fargo was doing in a bunch of these communities, they were giving black people subprime mortgages, even when they had great credit worthiness.
Which are
Huh?
subprime mortgages are?
Oh, subprime mortgages in this particular case are saying normally if your credit is below good, you're going to have a higher interest rate. What Wells Fargo decided to do is give variable interest rates on a home, which is crazy. Variable interest rates are okay for things like a home equity loan because you already have a house, you already have money. This is extra money. We're talking about the first loan on your house, which mortgage means death pledge in Latin, because you have to pay it off before you die or the bank takes the asset back. It's literally what it means in Latin. So people are put in these loans where they start off okay. It's maybe a little bit higher interest than their white counterpart, but we all know what happened with the subprime mortgage crisis. A lot of these people ended up losing their homes. These are the people that were hurt so much. It's not just what you saw in Big Short, where they had, the girl that was working in the strip club and she had 4 properties because she got ninja loans, no income, no job applications. That's what ninja stand for. We're talking about people that were hardworking. We're talking about people that put money down, that didn't have a first-time home buyer credit, and they got put in this situation. And Wells Fargo really never paid the money out where it was supposed to go. It was another situation like the opportunity zones. So, it's just like these things keep happening on purpose because it's a control thing.
I think that we still have one more episode left in Black History Month that's going to focus on those historical references and how they impact and influence what today looks like and what today's opportunities look like. We still have another episode for that. To that point, when I think about all that you've shared and compare that to what today looks like. So over the last 3 episodes, we've been talking about the Black History Month proclamation, the Black Business Month proclamation, specifically here in Colorado Springs. And what gives me comfort in speaking about something that is specific to Colorado Springs on a platform that has the ability to reach millions of people is that the lesson learned from this experience applies everywhere, which is when we talk about the most important political office in the land, that is the office of citizen. Firstly, it takes understanding what's going on in one's own community to have any kind of influence over what that can look like. Like you got to know what's going on to try to have influence. The same way that it has been championed to be the hustler of all hustlers.
Mm-hmm.
The same applies for the title of like boss and CEO and this, that, and the third. All of those things sound good and, you know, cool rap lyrics. But the reality is, if you really calling yourself boss, a boss has real influence. A boss can make things happen without saying it because they've put in the legwork for people to just understand. When we talk about all of the things that are going on here with the, you know, the whole Black History Month, Black Business Month proclamation, there are microcosms of this going on all across the country, all across the world. And too many of us have been rocked to sleep. You know, we cool, we comfortable, we not paying attention. Well, we're not even cool and comfortable. We are figuring it out as best as we can, but not engaging in these local issues that are so detrimental. Because if there isn't grassroots support for Black history at the local level, and it damn sure ain't gonna happen at the national level. It takes mobilization, it takes intentionality, it takes discipline to truly right the wrongs of a lot of the things that we talk about on this program. So, like I had been sharing over the past 3 episodes, I was supposed to have a slot on behalf of the Black Chamber of Commerce to speak about the proclamation being delivered, the Black History Month proclamation being delivered. And the city council president canceled, like she said, you know, we're not going to have any public comments. Now, notification came on the heels of, you know, all of the other things that were shared in those other 3 episodes, as far as all of the drama that has surrounded. Bruh, as I process all that, again, it just continues to circle back to the key theme of our responsibility to be engaged and aware and active in the things that we care about. So, like, we got to get away from, as a community, got to get away from the false, inflated sense of whatever that we want to call it when we say that we're the CEO of whatever, or we're the boss of whatever, or, bruh, if your influence can't change the lives of the people that you care about, you ain't did enough yet. And
Mm-hmm.
a big part of doing enough is knowing what's going on in the areas that you care about. I'm not from Colorado Springs, but I live here now. I don't have no, like, I'm here, but I have family here now.
Mm-hmm.
This is the community where I'm at right now. And when I move to my next community, I'll have the same ambition and drive for that community. We can't sit back and watch all of the that continues to happen, right? Like, those are the things that go through my mind as I listen to all of the history that you share. The eerie parallels to the same shit that's going on to this day. Parallels. There is inherent responsibility to understand how eerily comparative that the times are, to understand the assignment. This ain't the time to just be cool and chilling. This is the time to know what your city council is on. Because if you understand what your city council is on, you know what your city stands for. And your city may not stand for what you stand for. And if that's the case, then what you intend to do about that from a civic responsibility perspective?
Yeah, it's a fight for heritage. I had a great conversation with another Black professional today. She's looking to get some legislature together to change in Denver from it being Black. His people are fighting to Black Heritage Month, and it was a great conversation because her argument is based upon histories in the past. Black greatness exists right now, and the embracing of the culture, the accomplishments, and the influence is something that is so intrinsically weaved through American history that it cannot be ignored. So we had a great conversation about it. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be an effective way to bring
What's your
in.
read on that, though?
Well, it's interesting. You know, I didn't have hard feelings about it, but I always jump back to, when I think about maybe Minister Farrakhan, and it's like, are we Black? Are we African American? And that kind of creating some division where even if we did want reparations, how's it going to be paid out if people are identified differently, where we're not a whole collective? So, like, that's immediately where my mind jumped with saying, hey, we're going to go away from Black history to go into Black heritage. And I guess a big portion of the argument is for other cultures. We have Spanish Heritage Month, not Spanish History Month. So it was an interesting thing. What's your take on that?
I think that Black history is uniquely different from other subgroups of American culture. There isn't another culture that was stolen from another land to build another. The story of immigrants migrating to the United States to contribute to the United States is well documented. That's not Black American history. We've spoken about some of that history just in this of, going from cargo to capital. So, I ain't riding. Like, Black history is American history, period. There is no America without Black history. Understand the logic behind it, but history is history. So, like, if history makes people uncomfortable, that's not
That's a personal
justification.
problem.
You know what I mean? Like, that's not justification to change the terminology, right? Like, it's history. So it should be respected as such. It be learned from as such. That's my read on it.
Okay. I love that. I respect that. And, I don't, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't have hard feelings about it either way. What I care more so about is the celebration and elevation of Black genius, of the valor, of the sacrifices, of the love, the caring, of community building. That's what I care about. So whatever, if we come together as a collective and decide to call it something else, but everyone's going to link arms and we're going to ride, I'm cool with it.
So a big part of us starting this platform to begin with is the ability to control one's own narrative. So it frustrates me to no end to continue to have the Black experience and its narrative bastardized and turned into whatever that the person that's articulating a point turns it into. To your point, I don't have a hard stance or position on none of this stuff. Like, I'm not going to wake up in the middle of the night furious, sweating in my sleep because of it, the idea of it being referred to as Black heritage. I don't care enough for that, not honestly. But what does annoy me is the hijacking of narratives and the kind of full sail re-engineering. That's the part that I can't. That annoys the shit out of me, bro.
I get it. And like, if I'm thinking about, if I had this conversation with my dad, he would probably go, they just want us to tap dance a different way. The word history was offensive snitch. And I get that. And I feel that 100%. But one thing that I do appreciate is when I could just have great conversations with Black people in the community that are really doing the thing. And we can disagree on a whole myriad of stuff and still stay united. We got to keep the main thing the main thing. I'm going to start going into Malcolm. I'm going to start being the ballad or the bullet. Got the speech memorized. But as long as we are moving forward as a collective, that's the important thing. And as you always like to say, everybody can't go.
Unfortunately, man. Unfortunately, I sincerely, I wish that wasn't the reality, but the way that human psychology works, it just is what it is. So I can't afford to beat myself down or hold myself back because others are beating themselves back and holding themselves back. Like, I can't.
Right. And we can't, we're not in a position to Harriet Tubman this. Harriet Tubman is one of the most incredible leaders in history. If you listen to John C. Maxwell talk about her, and I think he is, when I think about high levels of leadership and understanding leadership, he's the dude. I think he's incredible. That's my guy. I love John C. Maxwell. And when he's talking about her and he's retelling what he learned during the Underground Railroad, that she would take them, and if someone got tired, if someone got scared, wanted to go back, she would pull that pistol out and put it against their head and say, look, you either making it to freedom or you're going to die right here. Which one do you want? And that's the ultimate. We're talking about influence as a leader. That's the ultimate influence. She literally forced them past their fears and their comfort zone to freedom. Never lost one person on the Underground Railroad. Absolutely incredible. And then ended up becoming a scout for the Union and helping them out with all these different paths that she had. She was an incredible decorated spy. Like, she doesn't get enough love in any way, shape, or form. But I say all that to say, you and I have a lot of influence, and our voices move people, carries weight. But for you and I to drag people across the finish line is a misuse of all that what we have. Whereas we can just keep building this, and we can attract the right ones and build leaders and attract leaders and have those leaders amplify. Like, let's multiply, not do addition.
Everybody can go.
Everybody can't go.
100%. 100%. All right. So the last thing that I don't want to, but what am I supposed to do with what gets presented to the world?
Mm-hmm.
So we spoke about the current president of the United States, the quote unquote leader of the free world, releasing a a truth, saying, with the former president Barack Obama and Michelle as apes. And when asked if there was an error in that release, he said, "Nope, I didn't make a mistake. I didn't see the racist segment showing the Obamas as apes," and blamed it on a staff aide for releasing it. Now, we operate as business owners, and we interface with entrepreneurs that have pioneered industries, that have pioneered things that we take for granted. Like, we do that.
Mm-hmm.
And engaging with these folks, the folks that you and I engaged with, what other senior level position are you aware of in which, if something of that magnitude were to happen and it came from a staff member, that the leader or hold the staff member accountable for anything, but just say, "Oh, it wasn't me, that was a staff member," and everything just moves along and there's no further recourse?
There's none. There's none. You just can't shaggy. It wasn't me with this sort of situation. This is so serious. And it's been a reoccurring theme over, well, the last 3 episodes we've been talking about for 200 years, but more specifically, if we look at like the last 11 years, things that have come out, when those recordings of Reagan came out, and he's calling black people apes, and they're saying, "Oh, it's allegedly him." It's like, this came from the White House. Like, you guys verified this. Hey, this didn't come from some random source. This is verified. So it's just propagating that racism, and it playing in our faces and keeping this supremacist energy going, because it's dying. And I know it doesn't seem like it's dying because it's so loud right now. That's exactly how I know that it's dying. These are the last screams of a dying mindset.
Man,
We up now.
I love the sentiment. What would make me like just be falling over at the concept of it is if I fully saw that being the case. I don't know if it's fully dying, bruh. I don't, because I've seen demonstrations of racism that in my 40 years of life on this earth, these things were like, let's not be so avert with our intentions because there's blowback. I've seen in the recent times, like, that concern of what the blowback could look like completely. It's people doing stuff now that, like, and confidently and transparently, that was concealed in the past. So from your perspective, how does that translate into it dying?
Okay, great question. So I really started looking at all of this stuff, the extreme conservatism, differently, maybe 8 years ago, listening to a lengthy talk by Obama. He's talking about the representation of the, like the former leader of the KKK and these different groups, how loud they are with the message, but how small their forces are. And just because things are more transparent, because it's easier to be seen, and because the zeitgeist right now is shifted towards these people being comfortable doing these things, it doesn't mean that it's more of them. And it doesn't mean that the collective is growing. It's just that the sound is louder. So it's just the way that they're representing it. And we saw very quickly when Elon, due to see the countries and which posts were being made on X, formerly known as Twitter, we saw that almost 95% of these pages that were saying all this stuff were either bots or they're being controlled in places like Russia and places like Ghana and places where they have set up these different little data centers to represent the people that don't exist that have that mindset. So that's why I landed on that, my brother.
Touche. No, I dig that. I do dig that. And I can see that. I can definitely see that. The current president created a megaphone for the smallest segments of our society. And the history of the United States, that can go both ways. I do hope that we as a people, we as the people, have a higher standard for what we will tolerate as a society than what our history as a country has produced up until this point. I do. You know, the fact that the Third Reich studied the United States history of slavery and Jim Crow to craft its Nazi ideology, and for that to manifest into people walking down the street in Germany as the ashed remains of Jewish people rain down on them like a storm. You know, it speaks to the ability of people to check out, become complacent to some of the most foundational threats. And as I watched us as a society, as an American society, tune out to some of the most atrocious things that, like, I couldn't even have imagined happening. You know, like, we just on to the next story quickly, regardless of how atrocious that it is. Like, we're shocked and in dismay for a day or two, and then we just move on. So it's like, with a society like that, when there's a microcosm of the society with those types of megaphones, we can go either way as a people, and that concerns me.
And to that point, that's why we have this. That's why we have Freedom Media Group, so that we can represent things with empathy and reconnect people to the human experience. You know, this has been the Asset Class. That's my boy Jesse.
And my man Earl. Thank you for listening.